In the far reaches of the galaxy, the planet Alara stood proud and distant, a world of lush forests and towering mountains, home to a powerful alien race. The Alnari, as they were called, were known throughout the galaxy for their superior strength, wisdom, and unmatched agility. The people of Alara had always looked down on humans, believing them to be weak and primitive, their civilizations far too young to be of any importance in the grand scale of the universe. Among the Alnari was their princess, Lyra, a young woman, whose beauty was only matched by her fierce pride. As a royal, she was expected to uphold the traditions of her people, and for her that meant never mixing with the human race. She had always been taught that humans were beneath them, that their ways were barbaric and uncivilized. The idea of joining with one in any way was not only unthinkable, it was disgraceful. However, circumstances were about to change. The galaxy was on the brink of war. Tensions between the United Human Federation and various alien factions had reached a breaking point, and the only hope for peace lay in the hands of those who could mediate between the two worlds. The Federation had chosen a representative, a soldier, a man with the strength and skill to navigate through the political storm. His name was Captain Ethan Carter. Ethan had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. As a soldier in the Mayo Federation, he had seen battles, death, and the harsh realities of war. But this was different. His mission was not to fight, it was to negotiate. He was tasked with securing peace between the humans and the Alnari, to convince their people that there was a way to avoid a catastrophic conflict. When Ethan arrived on Alara, he felt the weight of his mission pressing down on him. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty, and the beauty of the planet seemed almost out of place. Alara was a world full of contrasts, lush forests with skies so blue they almost seemed unreal, yet the tension in the air could be cut with a knife. Ethan was escorted through the towering gates of the royal palace, his heart beating faster with each step. He knew the Alnari would be difficult to deal with. They were a proud race, and Princess Lyra, their ruler, was known for her stubbornness and her deep belief in the superiority of her people. But Ethan had his own strength, forged in years of training and survival. He had faced tougher odds before. Inside the Grand Palace, the halls were lined with statues of Alnari warriors, each one representing the strength and wisdom of their people. Ethan felt small in comparison, but he squared his shoulders and reminded himself why he was here. He was not here to prove his strength or his worth as a soldier. He was here to negotiate peace. Finally, he was brought before the Princess Lyra. She stood tall, her posture regal, her long silver hair flowing like a waterfall of light. Her skin shimmered like the stars in the night sky, and her piercing eyes seemed to look straight through him. Lyra was everything the stories had promised: beautiful, strong, and intimidating. And as she looked at Ethan, there was no hint of warmth in her gaze. Ethan stood before her, trying not to show how much the sight of her took him off guard. He had read about the Alnari, but nothing had prepared him for the presence of the princess. Her beauty was unlike anything he had ever seen, but it was her confidence and strength that truly captivated him. "Captain Carter," Lyra said, her voice cold and commanding. "You are the human sent to speak for your people, to beg us to join. You? To share a peace with those who are beneath us?" Her words stung, but Ethan didn't let them show. He had been called worse. "I'm here to ensure the survival of both our peoples, Your Highness," he said, keeping his tone respectful. "We don't want conflict, we want peace. But that requires understanding, that requires cooperation, and that starts with dialogue." Lyra's eyes narrowed, and she took a slow step forward, her gaze never leaving his. "You think you can simply walk in here and change centuries of tradition? That we should just throw away our pride and join with your people? I think we can work together," Ethan said, meeting her gaze without flinching. "The galaxy is changing and we need to adapt. If we don't find common ground, it will destroy us both. I know you're not blind to the consequences." For a moment there was silence between them. Lyra seemed to be weighing his words, her expression unreadable. Ethan couldn't tell if she was angry, curious, or just impatient with the whole situation. But he knew that if there was any chance for peace, he had to break through her walls. "You, humans," Lyra finally said, her voice softer but still filled with disdain. "You are so quick to believe that your ways are the answer to everything. You think you can just come here, act as though you belong, and make us forget who we are." Ethan's patience was beginning to wear thin. "No one's asking you to forget who you are, Princess. But maybe you should consider that your people aren't the only ones capable of greatness. Humans are capable of things you can't even begin to understand." Lyra's eyes flashed, and for a moment Ethan wondered if he had gone too far. But before she could respond, the doors to the chamber opened, and a group of Alnari soldiers entered, bowing before her. Their arrival interrupted the tension, but it did nothing to calm the storm brewing in Lyra's eyes. "Captain Carter," she said, turning to him with a flicker of something like amusement, "you will stay here tonight. Tomorrow we will see what more you have to offer. But understand this, you will never change my mind. Humans are not worthy of our trust. Not now, not ever." Ethan's heart sank, but he refused to give up. This was just the beginning. He knew that he had to earn her trust, and that would take time, and he had time. "Tomorrow then, Your Highness," he said, bowing his head. "I hope we can find a way to work together." Lyra said nothing more. With a wave of her hand, she dismissed him. As Ethan turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a political battle. It was something more, something personal. But what he didn't know was that this would be the beginning of something that neither of them had ever expected. The journey ahead would test both of them in ways they couldn't imagine, and in the end, it would change everything. Next day, the atmosphere in the palace was different. There was an unease that lingered in the air, a heavy silence as though the entire palace was holding its breath. Ethan had expected some form of resistance from the Alnari, but what he had felt yesterday, Lyra's icy stare, her quiet anger, was something more personal. He knew it wasn't just a matter of politics. The princess didn't just hate the idea of peace with humans. She hated the very idea of humans themselves. Ethan stood in the grand hall, looking at the enormous doors that would lead him into the palace's training grounds. The sound of feet echoed from the hallway behind him. A guard, tall and imposing, stepped forward and motioned for him to follow. "Come with me," the guard said, his voice deep but respectful. Ethan nodded, his mind already trying to prepare for whatever might be waiting ahead. He had been briefed earlier that morning, and the information had come as a surprise. Lyra had decided to challenge him. She was a warrior first, and her pride as a fighter ran deeper than her royal bloodline. The princess wasn't going to accept his arguments, or his words. She would test his worth in the one way she understood best, through strength. As the doors opened before him, Ethan was met with a scene that made his heart skip a beat. The training grounds were vast, with high walls made of polished stone. A large circle had been marked on the ground, its borders filled with sand. Several Alnari warriors were gathered around, their sharp eyes watching him as he stepped inside. At the center of it all stood Lyra, tall and poised, her silver hair gleaming like a halo. She was waiting, her gaze fixed on him with a look of both challenge and disdain. "Captain Carter," she said, her voice cold, "today, you will prove whether you are worthy of being called an ally or if you are nothing more than a foolish human. The test will be simple. You and I one-on-one. Show me what you can do." Ethan swallowed, trying not to show the unease that crept up on him. He was no stranger to combat. As a soldier, he had fought in countless battles, faced enemies much stronger than him, and survived. But this was different. He was facing an alien princess, an elite warrior of a race that had built its strength and society on the foundation of battle. And she was proud of it. "I'll do my best," he said, his voice steady, though his mind was racing. Lyra smirked at his response, a hint of amusement crossing her face. "Your best will not be enough, but it is a start." The crowd of Alnari warriors stood still, waiting for the challenge to begin. Lyra was agile, quick, and her strength was legendary. She had never been beaten, and she was certain that Ethan, no matter how skilled, would be no different. Without warning, Lyra lunged forward, her movements so fast that Ethan barely had time to react. Her hand reached for his throat, but Ethan managed to sidestep just in time, narrowly avoiding her grasp. His heart raced, and for the first time he felt the weight of the situation. He was not just fighting for his life, he was fighting for the chance to prove that humans were more than just weak, fragile creatures. Lyra grinned as she quickly spun around to face him again. "Not bad, human," she said with a sneer, "but you'll need more than just speed to defeat me." Ethan wasted no time. He could feel the adrenaline flooding his veins. With a grunt, he charged at her, aiming a punch at her side, but Lyra was too quick. She dodged. The days following the test of strength were quiet, but the tension between Ethan and Lyra remained thick in the air. It was clear that the princess had seen something in him that she hadn't expected, something beyond the physical. And yet, as much as she tried to ignore it, a part of her couldn't deny the respect she had for the human soldier who had dared to challenge her. Ethan, on the other hand, had learned something crucial. Lyra wasn't just the cold, proud warrior he had imagined. Beneath her royal armor and unyielding pride, there was a depth to her, an inner strength that was as admirable as it was intimidating. He had seen it in the way she fought, in the way she held herself, and even in the moments when she let her guard slip just for a second. But the true test was still ahead. While they were learning to respect each other, neither was willing to show the other their vulnerabilities. Lyra was the princess of a powerful alien race, and Ethan was a soldier who had been sent to save his people. Their mission was far from over, and the road to peace between the humans and the Alnari was still unclear. But there was something about their connection, something unspoken, that made both of them wonder if peace was possible, not just between their peoples, but between them as individuals. One afternoon, after hours of working together in the palace's grand study, Ethan found himself walking through the gardens of the palace, his mind heavy with thoughts. The garden was a sprawling masterpiece full of alien flowers and strange, towering trees. The fragrance of the blossoms filled the air, and the soft rustling of leaves created a calming atmosphere. Ethan had learned that Lyra often retreated to the gardens when she needed time to think. It was a place of peace for her, a place where she could escape the demands of her role as a princess and find some solace. As he wandered through the path, he spotted her standing near a small pond, her back to him. The soft glow of the setting sun lit her silver hair, and for a moment she seemed almost like a figure from a dream. Her posture was perfect, regal as always, but there was something else in the way she stood, something vulnerable, something human. Ethan hesitated for a moment. He wasn't sure if it was appropriate to approach her, but after their shared experience in the training grounds, he felt as though they were beginning to move beyond their roles as soldier and princess. Finally, he took a step forward. "Your Highness," he said quietly, his voice respectful. Lyra turned slowly, her piercing blue eyes locking onto his. There was no anger in her gaze now, no challenge, just a quiet acknowledgement. "Captain Carter," she said, her voice soft but still, carrying the weight of authority. "What brings you to my garden?" Ethan stood still for a moment, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't the mission that had brought him here. It was something else, something he couldn't quite explain. But for the first time since his arrival, on Alara, he felt as though the tension between them had shifted, even if only slightly. "I thought I would see how you were doing," Ethan said, trying to sound casual. "It's been a long few days. I figured we could both use a break." Lyra studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You're right. It has been a long few days," she said slowly. "But you're not here just for a break, are you?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a few steps, closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't know what you mean, Princess. I thought we were getting along fine, but..." He paused, feeling uncertain. "There's something between us, isn't there? Something more than just the mission? More than just politics? Lyra's lips tightened for a moment, and Ethan could see the flicker of something behind her eyes, a mixture of hesitation and uncertainty. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, her voice low. "You are a human, and I am Alnari. We come from two very different worlds. There is no room for anything more than this alliance." "But what if there is?" Ethan asked, his voice soft but sincere. "What if there's more to us than just our races, our worlds? We've both seen things we didn't expect. I've learned something from you, more than just your strength, Lyra. I've learned that there's a part of you that wants to believe in something better, something beyond what we've been taught." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't look away. "You don't know me, human," she said, her voice tinged with a hint of sadness. "You don't know the weight I carry, the duty I have to my people. You may think you understand, but you cannot understand the responsibilities that come with being who I am." Ethan nodded, his gaze softening. "I understand more than you think. I'm not asking you to forget your responsibilities. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that we might not be so different after all." For a long moment, there was silence between them. The only sound was the rustling of the leaves in the breeze and the soft trickle of water from the pond. Lyra's expression softened, but she didn't speak. Finally, she let out a sigh, her shoulders dropping slightly. "Perhaps I have been too quick to judge you, Captain," she said quietly. "But I am not the only one who has been taught to distrust humans. My people, they will never accept you." Ethan took a step closer, his voice gentle. "Maybe. They don't have to accept me. Maybe they just need to see what I'm capable of, and if I have to prove myself to them, to you, then I will." Lyra's eyes met his, and for the first time Ethan saw something in her gaze, something softer. It wasn't the cold, distant princess he had seen on his first day. It was a woman, someone who had been raised to believe in the importance of her people's pride, but someone who was starting to question whether there might be more to life than just that pride. "You may be right, human," she said, her voice softer now. "Maybe. Maybe we are more alike than I thought." For a brief moment, Ethan allowed himself to hope. He could see it now. Lyra wasn't just the fierce warrior who stood against him. She was someone who carried the weight of her people's expectations, someone who had been taught to believe in their superiority. But beneath that armor, beneath that pride, she was like him. She wanted something more. As they stood there, the sun sinking lower in the sky, the bond between them seemed to grow. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a beginning, a quiet understanding that there was something worth exploring. Lyra turned back toward the pond, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe there is more to this alliance than I first believed, Captain," she said quietly. "But don't mistake my words for weakness. I will not bend so easily." Ethan smiled softly. "I wouldn't want you to. I wouldn't want anyone to." With that, they both fell into a comfortable silence, the weight of their shared understanding, settling between them like an unspoken promise. Neither of them knew where this path would lead, but they were willing to find out together. The peace that had begun to grow between Lyra and Ethan was fragile, like a thread stretched too thin, yet they both held on to it. They spent the following days together, working to build a foundation for the future of both their peoples. But peace, as they both knew, was never guaranteed. One evening, as they sat in the royal palace's dining hall, the calm atmosphere was shattered by an urgent message delivered by one of the palace guards. Lyra's expression immediately hardened as she listened to the news. Ethan could sense the shift in the air, the sudden tension that replaced the quiet conversations around the table. "What's going on?" Ethan asked, leaning forward, his gaze focused on Lyra. The guard had just finished speaking, and Lyra's eyes were cold, her thoughts racing. "There's been a disturbance," she said, her voice sharp. "A rebel faction within our own people has launched an attack on a neighboring city. They claim we've become too soft by entertaining the idea of peace with the humans. They believe the Alnari should remain above all others, that we should reject any alliances with weaker races." Ethan could see the anger flicker in her eyes. He knew that this was more than just a political issue for her, it was personal. Lyra was a leader, and her people's loyalty to her and their traditions were everything to her. The thought of someone defying her authority was unbearable. "I'll go with you," Ethan said, his voice steady, offering his support. "You'll need help to stop them." Lyra shook her head, her expression fierce. "I don't need anyone's help," she said, her pride clear in her words. "This is my responsibility, not yours." But Ethan wasn't backing down. "Lyra," he said, standing up, "if we don't stop them now, it could start a war. You'll need every resource you have to put an end to this. And that includes me." For a moment they stood there, their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. Then slowly Lyra nodded. She knew Ethan was right. This wasn't just about her. This was about the future of her people, and perhaps even the future of the alliance between the Alnari and humans. "Fine," she said finally, her voice low. "But you follow my lead, Captain. This is my fight, not yours." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. He understood the stakes, and he was ready. He wasn't here to prove anything to her anymore. He was here to fight alongside her for both their peoples. They traveled swiftly, leaving the palace with a group of elite Alnari warriors. The city that had been attacked lay in the northern region, a vast stretch of wilderness between them and their destination. As they journeyed, the tension between them seemed to fade, replaced by a quiet understanding. Lyra didn't speak much on the journey. She was lost in her thoughts, her mind focused on the challenge ahead. Ethan, however, kept his eyes on the path. The battle for the city was over, but the scars it left behind would take much longer to heal. As Lyra and Ethan walked through the streets, the weight of the destruction was everywhere. Buildings that once stood tall now lay in ruins, smoldering piles of stone and ash. The air still smelled of smoke, and the cries of the wounded echoed through the streets. It was a scene of loss, and it weighed heavily on Lyra's heart. She had won the battle, but the cost had been high. Several of her most trusted warriors had fallen, and the rebellion had left a deep divide among her people. There were those who would never forgive her for aligning with humans, for choosing peace over pride. And there were those who had always supported her, who would now rally around her knowing that her choices had kept them safe. But peace, Lyra realized, wasn't just about defeating enemies. It was about healing, about bringing people together. And right now, her people were broken. As they moved through the devastated city, Lyra's thoughts were consumed with the future. How would they rebuild? How would she restore her people's faith in her? The Alnari had always been a proud people, and their pride had led them to greatness, but pride alone wouldn't heal the wounds they had inflicted upon themselves. Ethan walked beside her, his presence a quiet comfort. He hadn't said much since the battle had ended, but she could feel his steady support. He had fought with her, fought for her people, and now, as they faced the aftermath together, he didn't look at her with judgment. He simply looked at her as an ally, someone who understood the weight of leadership and the burden of difficult choices. "How do you keep going after everything?" Lyra asked, her voice soft, her eyes focused on the ruins ahead of them. "How do you keep your people from falling apart?" Ethan paused for a moment before responding. "It's not easy," he said quietly, "but you have to keep moving forward, even when it seems impossible. Your people will look to you for guidance. They need to see that you're still standing, that you're still fighting for them, and that means you have to keep believing that there's a future worth fighting for." Lyra glanced at him, surprised by the depth of his words. "You sound like you've been through this before," she said, her voice tinged with curiosity. Ethan nodded. "I've seen it before. War changes people, and not always for the better, but it also shows you what really matters. The people who stand by you, the ones you fight for, and that's something worth fighting for." Lyra felt a warmth in her chest at his words, something she hadn't expected to feel. She had always carried her burden alone, her pride keeping her distant from others. But in that moment, standing beside Ethan, she realized that maybe she didn't have to carry it alone anymore. "I never wanted to be a leader," Lyra admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I never asked for this responsibility, but now I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to fix what's broken. Ethan turned to her, his eyes steady and full of understanding. You don't have to fix everything overnight, he said. It's going to take time. But you're not alone in this. You have your people, and you have me. We'll rebuild. Together. Lyra's throat tightened, and for a moment she could barely find the words, but somehow Ethan's simple statement gave her more hope than anything else. The weight of her crown, the burden of her people's future. It still felt heavy. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely alone in carrying it. As the days passed, the rebuilding of the city began. Lyra threw herself into the task, meeting with the leaders of her people, making plans for the future, and slowly restoring the faith of those who had been lost in the rebellion. The process was slow, and there were many who still resented her choices. But there were also those who had seen the bravery in her actions, who knew that peace with the humans was the only way forward. Ethan remained by her side, offering his support, but never pushing her to make decisions she wasn't ready for. He had learned that Lyra was a leader, not just by birthright, but by choice. She carried the weight of her people on her shoulders, and while she was proud and strong, she was also deeply vulnerable. And that vulnerability, Ethan realized, was what made her such an extraordinary leader. One afternoon, as they sat in the palace courtyard, the sun beginning to set behind the mountains, Lyra turned to Ethan with a serious expression on her face. I need to ask you something, she said, her voice quiet but firm. You've been with me through all of this, through the battle, through the chaos. But now that the worst of it is over, I need to know, what do you really want, Ethan? Ethan looked at her, his heart beating a little faster. The question had caught him off guard, and for a moment, he wasn't sure how to respond. What did he want? He had come to Alara to help mediate peace between humans and the Alnari, but now, as he looked at Lyra, he realized that his feelings for her had grown deeper than he had ever expected. I came here to help, he said finally, his voice steady. I came here to make sure that humanity and your people could coexist. But somewhere along the way I realized something. I realized that I don't just want peace for our peoples. I want peace with you. Lyra's eyes softened, and for the first time, she allowed herself to show a hint of emotion. I don't know what this is between us, she said quietly. I don't know if it's just the stress of everything we've been through or something more, but I feel it too. For a long moment they simply sat there, the weight of the world between them, but also something lighter, something unspoken, but deeply understood. They had fought side by side, faced impossible odds together, and through it all they had built something more than just an alliance. They had built a bond. You don't have to decide anything right now, Ethan said, his voice low. But just know that I'm here for you. Whatever happens next, I'm with you. Lyra looked at him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to smile. Small, but real. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. The days turned into weeks, and the city of Alara began to rebuild piece by piece. Lyra's people, though still divided, slowly started to heal. The lessons learned from the rebellion were not easily forgotten, but they had forged a path toward a new future, one that was built on understanding and cooperation. As for Lyra and Ethan, the bond between them continued to grow. It wasn't an easy road. There were still many challenges ahead, and not everyone was ready to accept a future where humans and Alnari could coexist. But Lyra and Ethan knew that together, they could face whatever came next. They had already proven that in battle, and now they were ready to prove it in peace. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Lyra didn't face it alone. The months that followed the battle were filled with quiet progress and hard work. The city of Alara had slowly recovered, its people healing from both the physical and emotional scars left by the rebellion. The Alnari people, proud as ever, had begun to accept that change was necessary, and while not everyone agreed with Lyra's decision to work with the humans, many began to see the value in peace. Lyra stood at the palace's balcony one evening, looking out over the city. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the horizon. It was beautiful, calm, peaceful, and, for the first time in a long while, Lyra allowed herself to breathe. She had worked so hard to restore order, to heal the rift within her people, that she had barely had time to think about herself. Ethan had been by her side through it all, and while their relationship had started as something born out of necessity, it had grown into something neither of them had expected. They had fought together, bled together, and slowly, without either of them realizing it, they had become something more than allies. "You're quiet," Ethan said, his voice drawing her attention. She turned to find him standing a few steps behind her, his arms crossed, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "I was just thinking," she said softly, turning back to look at the city. "About everything we've been through, about how much has changed in such a short time." Ethan moved closer, standing beside her. "It's been a lot," he agreed. "But you've done it. You've brought your people back from the edge. You've brought peace." Lyra nodded, but there was a slight heaviness in her expression. "I've done what I could," she said. "But there's still so much left to do. My people, they've lost trust, and it's not easy to rebuild that. They don't just follow me because I'm their princess. They follow me because they believe in me, and I have to make sure they continue to believe." Ethan could see the weight of leadership bearing down on her. He had watched her work tirelessly, seen the exhaustion in her eyes as she pushed herself beyond what anyone could expect. But he also knew something she didn't seem to see, that she had already done so much. Her people had seen her strength, her courage, and the sacrifices she had made. She had already proven herself to them. "You don't have to do it all alone," Ethan said, his voice steady. "You've already built something incredible. Your people are stronger now because of you. And I think you've earned their trust." Lyra turned to face him, her eyes searching his as though she were looking for something. Some reassurance, some confirmation that what he said was true. "Do you really think so?" she asked quietly. Ethan nodded. "I know so. You've changed the course of your people's future, Lyra. You've done more than just fight. You've shown them a new way, a way where peace is possible." She looked away,